Good afternoon. This is Pastor John Rounds. I'm hosting the program Endurance, and I want to thank everybody that's listening. And I know that there's some that have been listening to Standing Up, along with Endurance, along with other people that have certain segments of teaching on their programs and stuff. And so I think we have some really good teachers. Now, I don't know about me because I've had people come up to me and say they listen to it, and that really blesses me because, like I said, I'm standing in like four walls and stuff and looking, and also looking at Melanie and stuff. But it's been it's been quite a week, quite a weekend and stuff. We had Thanksgiving and Christmas, and now we have the New Year's. Now, hopefully and prayerfully that your New Year is starting out good. I know there have been people that kind of make desires or decisions they want to do through this new year, and I don't know if that they still do that. I don't hear that very much anymore, but I know that I heard somewhere on one of the newscasts that there's people that actually want to stop drinking, alcohol and stuff for at least a month, and they say that really helps people. I don't know how much they drink, and I don't really. I care, but anyway, it's kind of interesting to listen to some of that. And I actually had some uncles that decided to stop drinking. Actually, one of them did and stuff for quite some time, and actually hadn't been back drinking. So it's been a good time, good season. So hopefully your New Year is starting out good. And I apologize for last week. I haven't Stella Melanie, my thoughts and everything was kind of all mixed up, and trying to get my notes and everything all brought out on the tablet, and it hadn't worked out very well. So anyway, I apologize for last week and the week before last. And so this week, I'm really excited about this week's lesson. I'm going to speak about Daniel. Daniel is a individual that I'm totally fascinated with. Pastor Randy I've heard his messages on his radio, and one he talked about fasting. We did some fast the last 3 days last week and stuff, and so people are getting out of their fast today and stuff, and so it's been really good. And he talked about Daniel. I think it's in the what was it? Daniel chapter 6 and chapter 7 speaks about. No, I take that back. Well, let me go with this Daniel, and there's another one: Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Now, Mishael, I might have mispronounced the name pretty good. There's four of them, four young men that were taken captive in 605 B.C. And the term and the of where they were taken from is simply very important, because I'll get on to that a little bit later about what some of the writers and commentary are saying about Daniel and stuff. And he's all of them are very interesting about going into Babylon. And Babylon is like Pastor Randy mentioned last week, and if I kind of hit a little bit on what he said, Babylon is kind of like in today's, it was in Genesis chapter 11, and also you'll find it in Daniel, where it came out to a fortified or a big area and stuff that Daniel went into and stuff, and I'll get on part of that. But what this is bringing out here about Daniel, and actually it was four of them that came out that was very there's a word I'm kind of looking for right now, but have chosen a certain standard, a certain holiness about them that just totally fascinates me. Like I mentioned, Daniel is a type of book that really fascinates me in such a way that I look at this and wondering how in the world that these young men were captured, taken to Babylon. Actually, there was there was 3 times that Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem, and the third time he actually leveled the place. Some of the kings there that Nebuchadnezzar actually put in had rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and then he turned right around and just leveled the place. I think it was in 597 BC. These, like I said, the names are very important because some people look at Daniel and like they said that he had written on the 1st century BC, and others said the 2nd century BC, but in reality, Daniel was written on the 6th century BC. And the reason why I said that, 605 BC, and the reason why I said that is simply because of that he had a historical point of view on what this country is going to go through. Daniel, I mentioned, that it's kind of like it's kind of like a place that it's like the United States. We come to our country and stuff. I love the United States. I was born and raised here, and I think it's a great country. However, I do believe it's under the judgment of God. You have the Twin Towers that have fallen in 2001. Some 20 years later, the virus hit and actually taken out most of the world at that time. It started in China and then hit the U.S. and then it went on throughout the remainder of the world during that time. I don't think we'll ever get over this virus. I think there's always some bits and pieces of it that are still out there. Now, whether they say that to kind of scare us into doing certain things, I do not know. And I don't want to get into politics, and I don't want to get into all these other stuff right now because one we're Bible teachers, we're not politic teachers, and I have an idea that if I get into politics, I'm going to turn a lot of people off, and that's one thing I do not want to do. But let me look at this. Daniel chapter 1 speaks about it, mainly the introduction. It tells you about the introduction of what Daniel went through at that time. So let me kind of back up a little bit here. Let me read out Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 here. It said, in the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. Now, I'm reading out of the ISV version of this because I think it's better written. But within a week, the Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with valuable objects from the house of God. Nebuchadnezzar brought them to the temple of his God in the land of Shinar, stored them in its treasured house. Now I'm going to stop right there because it speaks about later what it was coming out to be. I'm totally amazed that how these 4 young men have went into Babylon. It's kind of like what we do today. We are living in, I believe, with all my heart, with the way the society is, the way the culture is, the way everything is. We're living in a type of Babylon, and Babylon really touches a lot of this. Not only this country, but it touches European countries. It touches a lot of other countries that were living under that we're walking into it. So when I say we're walking into Babylon, I believe with all my heart, Babylon is the place that we're walking into. If you take a look at what all is transpiring, there's drug abuse. We're having people that are drug affected, that are alcoholics, that are running around, that basically they're wind up killing people. That we had last week, I heard on the news that there was a 6-year-old that shot his own teacher. And some of these things are really, it just amazes me on what goes on not only in our schools, but what goes on in all of society itself and stuff. And so we see these things. We have kids that are going to school. They don't know, that they're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them and stuff. And so their indoctrination comes with, well, they don't know whether they're male or female, whether, and some kids are coming out totally confused by what they're listening to or what they're hearing at. I tell you, if I had a kid that's going to school, I'd be the first one that would go in there and tell them, don't teach them that. I don't care if that's a law. I don't care if it's what they told them to do or what the case is. But I said, don't teach them that kind of stuff. They have enough to contend with, let alone them trying to learn a lot of this stuff. I have, I don't like to mention too well, but I know of a young lady that has that issue, and the problem is she don't know whether she's a girl or boy sometimes. And it totally it hurts me a lot to listen to it. Now, it's so much want to sit her down and speak to her, but I know she wouldn't listen to me. But anyway, getting along here, let me go on with what Daniel was saying here. Chapter 1 is the introduction of Daniel. Chapter 2 is basically where Nebuchadnezzar had this dream that he had a dream that was over. Actually, you'll find in chapter 7, also in chapter 8. There's another chapter, actually chapter 7 and chapter 9 that speaks about that. That talks about the beast in it's chapter 7 and chapter 8. Then you'll find in Revelation chapter 13, 1 through 10, it talks about the beast there. Chapter 3 talked about Ananias, Mishael, Azariah. Now, they gave them different names during that time, and I'll read a little bit more about what they've, the names that they were given in. And it's interesting to what I'll bring that out a little bit later on that. And then chapter 6, chapter 5 talks about Belshazzar's festival, and that's called the writing on the wall. The writing on the wall there. And then chapter 6 speaks about Daniel thrown into the lion's den. Then chapter 9 speaks about the 70 weeks that I believe that Daniel is speaking about that. Then chapter 11 talks about the 7-year tribulation period. Chapter 12 is talking about the end times. So in reality, when you look at Daniel and you really study him out, it actually speaks about all the historical facts that Israel was going to go through. They were going to go through what is called a Gentile, and I thought I had it written down here, but it's called a Gentile, where the Gentile was beginning to become a major part of our society today, and that's exactly what's going on today. It's actually more of a Gentile than it is a Jew and stuff, or Jewish or Israel's a part in this. So Daniel talks about there's. Let me go on with another part here. It's called Daniel's division, chapter 1 through 6. It speaks about where it is written in Aramaic, if I pronounce that correctly. In chapter 1 through 6 is talking about Aramaic. In chapter 7 through 12 is speaking about Hebrews, where he's talking to the Jews and stuff. And so it's actually divided into two separate divisions here, where you find out where Daniel was at that particular time. So it's interesting what Daniel foresaw. He foresaw 4 monarchs actually take over, and actually Daniel was going to live out his life. And Daniel and Ananias, Mishael, and Azariah were 16 years old when they were captured and sent to Babylon. 16 years old, and they say that Daniel most likely have lived to be 80 years old at that particular time. They said somewhere in the neighborhood that he most likely passed away at 530 BC and stuff. But, what a historical fact. Once you get into and once you really look at what Daniel has at, he actually speaks about historical revelations about the Gentile nations being brought up. First of all, Israel was captured by Babylon. Second, Metro and Persia, they're two different nations that took place in chapter 2. Actually, it's chapter 2 and chapter 7. That's where I was trying to get at. I apologize for that. Chapter 2 and chapter 7. Chapter 7, it talks about the beast, and that's where it gets into what chapter 2 basically speaks about their pristine. I don't know if there's another name for it, but talks about whether they were coming out as kind of a nations there. But chapter 7 is speaking about it, talking about the beast, how they're coming out to be the beast. Chapter 3 speaks about when Ananias, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the fiery furnace. Chapter 4 is speaking about Nebuchadnezzar's failing and falling into his kingship. And this is an interesting part of Nebuchadnezzar. This is a testimony from Nebuchadnezzar. I began to wonder if he was not saved, if Daniel wasn't a part of Nebuchadnezzar's life during that time, because it took Nebuchadnezzar, actually, I believe it was 2 dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel was one. Actually, this is the part here where Daniel went in and spoke to him. He said, Nebuchadnezzar, I wish above all else this was to your enemies. But in reality, in chapter 4, he says it, but in reality, it is to you. He says, you're going to be brought up in pride and arrogancy to where that you're going to fail and fall in your kingship. And actually, where he was talking about, he says, you're going to actually crawl through the forest and eat like an ox. You're going to eat grass like an ox. And actually, you're going to grow. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of around 7 years that Nebuchadnezzar was going to be in this place, in this spot. How his kingdom was taken care of, or how it was watched over during that time, nobody really knows. It wasn't really brought out that how it was, who was going to be the king during that time. I believe with all my heart, I could be wrong, but I believe it was Daniel, the one that actually took his kingship over during that time until Nebuchadnezzar was able to look. The Bible says he looked into heaven. When he looked into heaven, he was restored. God had restored him some 7 years right after. He came and he said this right at the very end of his time, where he said basically that he said, when I looked to heaven, I found out that God had begun to restore me to my kingship. And he said, I know that there is a Lord of Lords and a King of Kings. And like I said, I don't know for sure. And I have to wonder in my own heart and mind if he was not saved during that time, if he did not give his life over to Christ during that time. Now, I could be wrong on that, but it's hard to say, because he's the one that basically came out and he said, I know that God had brought me to be a king. I know God took me down. I know he brought me back up. I was trying to tell young people before about serving the Lord and how important it is to make sure that, irregardless of, I know that we're the ones that, and there's probably others, I'm not sure, there's some that don't do that, but I know we're the ones that actually and we kind of spur them along, kind of praise them on the work they do, and they should be. But however, I hope and pray that praising, once it leaves, that they don't wind up, being addictive to that praise. I know what it's like. Believe me, I know what it's like. I went through that, and I've been going through that since I came out of the hospital over that head injury. Actually, it was around 6 years ago. And I often wondered if God is trying to bring me to the place where it's like 7 years, because in 2023, it'll be 7 years since that accident has happened. And I wondered if that will be the time that the Lord will begin to reveal to me why he did what he did. And I know, without a shadow of a doubt, I know Pastor Randy spoke about it and prayed about it, and he was telling me, John, I think a lot of it was out of arrogancy. I think you got arrogant in your teaching and preaching. And I thought for a moment, I said, who he's talking to and stuff. And so I was kind of giving him maybe I was giving him a little bit of a bad time there, but in reality, I got to thinking about that, and he was absolutely correct. He was absolutely right on that. I did get arrogant. I did get prideful in that, and I totally understand why God brought me. I think I am so thankful what the Lord has done in my heart and life. I know I know I've been on the radio for the past 6 years, and I hopefully and prayerfully I was able to speak and to get the message out in such a way that people, I've heard people say that they've really enjoyed the messages and stuff that come from Endurance, and I'm really it really blesses me, and I'm really blessed by it and stuff. And so this is the thing that Daniel really brings out. He brings out a historical fact of what the Lord is doing in Babylon. So it was Babylon is Metra Persia, it was Greece, and then it was Rome. 4 of those monarchs would come up during Daniel's time. Daniel actually, when you look in chapter 1, verse 21, he said he was right there during Cyrus. Cyrus is a Persian king that came up during that time. So it was very important for Daniel. Daniel lived all the way up to be 80 years old during that time, and he was very fluent in his gospel. He's very fluent in righteousness. He's very fluent in what he has done. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at what people have done, or godly people, I should say, godly people have done through all the difficulties they have gone through. And I believe with all my heart that it's going to take those kind of believers that are living in today. I'm talking about today and yesterday, in the last, I'd say in the last 10 years, what this country is going through. I believe that a lot of things that this country is going through simply because we're living in that Babylonian time. And this is the time that we need to really stand up for righteousness, stand up for holiness, stand up for what God desires for us to do, stand up for the cross of Christ, stand up for what Jesus is doing in our heart and life. That's what we need to do, irregardless if it's in church or if it's in public. We should be able to speak to people about what the Lord is really doing in our heart and life, because people listen more to what God is doing in our life. I know sometimes people are going through difficult times, and we have to help them through that. And there's no doubt about that. But we also got to realize that when we speak it, we got to speak it as something that God has done in our lives. That it may give people a hunger and a thirst where they want to come out in that. And so with that, I'm running out of time. I didn't realize that time went by so fast. And so we'll get into next week's lesson. I hope and pray that you really receive something from the Lord in this. And so with that, this is Pastor John Rounds for the program Endurance. I pray that you've received something from it. Have a great, great day, and we'll speak to you next week. Bye now.